Good morning. This is Terry Goldberg, Executive Director of NUMOA, and I want to welcome you to this morning's webinar, which is focused on the hazardous waste pharmaceuticals rulemaking, particularly the sections related to reverse distribution and reverse logistics. It's great to have you all join us this morning. We are going to get underway in a minute or so. As a number of people are still joining us, I can see that we have more and more attendees. I hope everyone is doing well and is safe these days. I just want to do a few logistics before we get started. All of you should be able to see your dashboard. On the dashboard, you can see that there is a question box sort of towards the middle of the gray area. In my case, it's towards the bottom of the box. You'll see a little square with a dash through it. If you want to ask a question as the speakers are presenting, please use the question feature. I will be monitoring it, and I will I will pose the questions at the end of the presentation to the presenters as they came in, and I'll bundle any questions that are similar. So please don't hesitate to use the question feature of GoToWebinar. We are going to keep all of the participants muted during the presentations. If we can during the Q&A and it makes sense, I might unmute some of the people posing questions, as I've done in the past for these webinars. We have a lot of people who are joining us today, so I'm only going to unmute very selectively. If you need to communicate anything about GoToWebinar or any problems you're having with the platform, you can use the chat feature in the GoToWebinar template. Again, that's in that sort of grayed out part toward the bottom. So please use either of those features of this platform. I wanted to let everyone know that I am recording this webinar this morning, and we will be posting the recording later on the NUMOA website. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our presenters today. We're really lucky to have them joining us. And those of you who are veterans of NUMOA EPA webinars, you'll recognize these folks, and also from the RIN activities that EPA supports. But our first presenter is going to be Kristen Fitzgerald. Kristen has been with the EPA since 2001, working primarily on hazardous waste generator issues. She started working with RCRA almost 30 years ago, answering questions on the RCRA Superfund hotline. She holds a BA in government from St. Lawrence University in New York and a master's in environmental science and policy from George Mason University in Virginia. Our other presenter is going to be Brian Knieser. He's worked at EPA since 2016 in the hazardous waste recycling and generator program. Since then, he has primarily worked on the management standards for hazardous waste pharmaceuticals rulemaking and implementation of the hazardous waste generator improvements rule. He has a BS from the College of William & Mary and an MS from Johns Hopkins University. I think a lot of you know both Kristen and Brian pretty well, particularly anyone who's been involved in any of Brian's RIN calls lately, which is a great source of network and information, with EPA headquarters on RCRA issues. Just to let you know, we are going to have Kristen and Brian do the presentation first. We hope that'll take, not certainly less than maybe an hour of today's session, and then we'll have ample time for Q&A. I would like to thank NUMOA's hazardous waste training work group. They are the ones who sort of set up this as a topic for excuse me, a NUMOA webinar or session, and they're the ones who sort of oversee all of the sort of hazardous waste training activities that NUMOA puts together. So there's a number of folks on today's webinar who are in that work group, and I just want to acknowledge all of their hard work and dedication to putting all of this kind of stuff together. So I'm going to turn it over to Kristen now, and we'll get started. Thank you, Kristen.
Thank you, Terry. And thanks to NMOA for inviting us to speak again about the pharmaceuticals rule. So, last time we spoke to you, I think it was a little over a year ago, it was a kind of overview of the rule, kind of did the whole thing soup to nuts. But this time we've specifically been asked to talk about reverse flow of items, especially from retail. So that's going to be our focus today. So as you know, how to apply RCRA to this reverse flow of items has been a question that we've all grappled with literally for decades. And, as a symptom of that, a few years ago, the California legislature, they were also grappling with this, and they actually required the California DTSC, Department of Toxic Substance Control, to convene a work group of stakeholders to discuss these issues and then get back to them as a legislature with recommendations. So the California work group met regularly for about a year. And after those discussions, they, had to report back to the legislature because they had a ticking time clock, the legislature gave them. But, after a year of those discussions, they, did have to do a report, but they did not end up coming up with consensus recommendations as a group. And, I think, I'm not trying to make them sound bad or like cast aspersions. I'm just saying it's because these issues are tough, right? And they boil down to, when, one of the trickiest RCRA questions that we all have to deal with is, the point of generation issue. And when do items become waste? So as you also probably know, it took us 2 proposals to get to a final rule. And there's lots of stakeholder engagement, including listening into those California work group sessions, public comments on both rules, to arrive at kind of our best answers to these tricky RCRA questions. And that's what we're going to be discussing today. So Brian's going to start us off by talking about reverse distribution, and then I'm going to chime in later to discuss reverse logistics. We plan to speak for roughly 45 minutes and plan to leave the rest of the time for Q&A and discussions. But before I hand it over, Brian, I just want to mention, so way back in 2019, feels like 100 years ago now, Brian and I were averaging about a presentation a week on the pharmaceuticals rule. We're in very different times now, and we haven't given a presentation in over 6 months. And this one's from home. So this is our first presentation that we're doing on the rule from home, and it's been a few months, so bear with us as we shake off the cobwebs. And I do want to point out that by some miracle, this was totally happenstance. My entire family is out of the house today while I'm giving this presentation. I think this is the first time that I've had the house alone to myself in several months. I just want to let you know I'm here spending it with you. Brian, on the other hand, has 2 toddlers running around his house, so you might hear some background noise, I'm guessing. He probably is not as lucky as I to have the house by myself. So I'm going to hand it over to Brian, and he's going to get us started.
Thanks, Kristen. Yeah, actually, if we would have started this about 15 minutes sooner, you would have heard quite the ruckus, but my mom actually came over and was able to get them out of the house, so they are out on a walk right now. So hopefully I will remain uninterrupted. So yeah, again, good morning, everyone. I'm Brian Kenizer. Thanks for joining us today. I just wanted to go over the outline for today's presentation real quick. And Kristen and I are going to be kind of switching off throughout the presentation, so we'll be kind of doing a tag team effort on this. So I'm going to start off by getting into some details about reverse distribution, and then we're going to talk about 2 of the reverse distributors that are located in NMOA states. Then Kristen's going to talk about reverse logistics in some detail, and after that we're going to move into some FAQs about reverse distribution, and then I'm going to talk about unauthorized waste reports, and we'll finish up with a quick update on which states have adopted the rule so far. Okay, so let's get into it. So the first section, this whole section is actually about reverse distribution, but I'm actually going to start off by talking about the difference between reverse distribution and reverse logistics. And this is really the most important idea that we want to convey to you today. So if you remember nothing else from the presentation today, we want you to understand the distinction between reverse logistics and reverse distribution. So just for a little background, when we proposed the rule, we didn't actually propose both terms. We initially called the reverse flow of any pharmaceutical from a healthcare facility, we called that reverse distribution. And when I say reverse flow, I'm talking about all of the pharmaceuticals that leave a healthcare facility that aren't going directly for disposal. And we're going to get into some more of those details about the flow in the next couple slides. So really, it turns out that there's more to this reverse flow than we realized at first. And so commenters on the proposed rule, they told us that reverse distribution and reverse logistics, that those are actually two distinct processes. And they pointed out that reverse distribution, the reverse distribution process is for prescription pharmaceuticals, and that reverse logistics is for non-prescription pharmaceuticals as well as everything else. So ultimately, we ended up adopting the terminology that the commenter suggested. So from now on, whenever we talk about reverse distribution, we're talking about prescription pharmaceuticals. When we talk about reverse logistics, we're talking about non-prescription pharmaceuticals as well as any other unsold retail items. So just to repeat that, make sure you got it. Reverse distribution is for prescription, and it kind of rhymes, so maybe it'll stick. And reverse logistics is for non-prescription, so things like OTCs and unsold retail items. And I think the two terms kind of sound familiar, and I think that's part of where some of the confusion comes from. So we're going to try and drill that into your head. Reverse distribution, prescription pharmaceuticals, reverse logistics, everything else. So RD, RX, RL, everything else. Okay, so hopefully by this point you've at least got it clear in your head that there's a distinction between reverse logistics and reverse distribution. So now I'm going to talk about the specifics about reverse distribution, and then Kristen, like I said, is going to dig deeper into reverse logistics. So, I already said that commenters corrected us on the terminology that we had proposed. Maybe enlightened is a better way to say it. But the commenters on the rule, they also confirmed that what reverse distributors do is they take shipments of unused and expired prescription pharmaceuticals from healthcare facilities, and they act as intermediaries to facilitate the process of issuing credit to healthcare facilities on behalf of the manufacturer. So if that was confusing, I'll try and reword it. So basically, reverse distributors issue credit to healthcare facilities on behalf of pharmaceutical manufacturers. So another really important idea that commenters confirmed is the fact that pharmaceuticals that are sent to a reverse distributor, that they are almost never reused or resold. So in other words, basically everything that is sent to a reverse distributor ends up getting discarded. And because we were able to confirm that, the final rule, we codified in the final rule our position from the proposed rule that prescription pharmaceuticals that are sent to a reverse distributor, that those are waste at the healthcare facility. So another way to say it is that the decision to send pharmaceuticals to a reverse distributor is a decision to discard. All right, so that was kind of a lot of the background description in words. So now we're going to talk about some of the conceptual flow for a minute with the graphics. So hopefully that'll help solidify what I just talked about. And just so we're clear that this slide is talking about reverse distribution only. And so we're only talking about prescription pharmaceuticals. So everything in this diagram is considered waste at the healthcare facility. So that means that everything here on this example for reverse distribution, everything is destined for a TSDF, just a matter of how it gets there. All right, so on the left side of the healthcare facility picture, you have pharmaceutical waste that is going to a reverse distributor, and that means that it has a reasonable expectation of receiving manufacturer's credit. And so, we're not really getting into the definitions of potentially creditable, non-creditable in these slides. But if you're not sure about that reasonable expectation concept, maybe you can bring it up during the Q&A session if we have time, or just feel free to email Kristen or me. So if a pharmaceutical waste has a reasonable expectation of receiving manufacturer's credit, it is sent to a reverse distributor. It can also go to a second reverse distributor, but then it will ultimately end up at the TSDF. So that was the left side. On the right side, you have prescription waste that has no reasonable expectation of receiving manufacturer's credit. And because of that, it has to be sent directly to a TSDF for disposal if it's hazardous. Okay, so now we're going to get a little deeper into what it is that a reverse distributor does and what they can accept and cannot accept from healthcare facilities. So you've probably got the picture already, but reverse distributors, they're kind of like middlemen between the manufacturers and healthcare facilities as it pertains to the credit for unsold prescription pharmaceuticals. So the credit, it's not really the RD's credit, but they're given authority from the manufacturer to issue that credit to the healthcare facility on behalf of the manufacturer. So how do reverse distributors fit within the Subpart P regulatory frameworks? Well, to start with, they are now considered a new type of hazardous waste management facility, which means that they can accept hazardous waste from off-site, but they're not actually the generators of that waste. Under Subpart P, they can only accept waste that meets the definition of potentially creditable hazardous waste pharmaceutical in 266-500. And to be considered potentially creditable, hazardous waste pharmaceutical has to have a reasonable expectation of receiving manufacturer credit. So what that also means is that they cannot accept other types of hazardous waste, including other types of hazardous waste pharmaceuticals. Oops, sorry. Nice. I just realized that all my my speaker notes, the long ones got cut off. So I guess I'll just wing it from here. So reverse distributors, they were not requiring them to receive a storage permit, and they are not allowed to treat the waste that they receive, and they have to comply with these new regulations that we finalized in Subpart P, and those regulations are similar to the LQG regulations, but with some additions. And the last thing that I'll mention is that all reverse distributors are regulated the same for their hazardous waste pharmaceuticals. So there are no VSQGs, SQGs, or LQG reverse distributors. They are regulated the same. All of the reverse distributors are regulated the same. So, now that you know everything there is to know about reverse distributors, I'm going to talk about the definitions. So a reverse distributor is any person that receives and accumulates prescription pharmaceuticals that are potentially creditable hazardous waste pharmaceuticals for the purposes of verifying manufacturer credit. But you already knew that. They're also anyone that processes prescription pharmaceuticals for the purposes of facilitating and verifying manufacturer's credit. And that can include forward distributors, third-party logistics providers, and pharmaceutical manufacturers. So here's the thing about the reverse distributor term. So EPA, we have our own recently finalized version of the term, but DEA also has their own version. And they're actually, both versions are actually sort of similar in that they both receive pharmaceutical waste from healthcare facilities. And some facilities are both EPA and DEA reverse distributors, but many of the DEA reverse distributors are what we would actually consider to be RCRA TSDF. So looking at the left side of this slide, if a facility is only issuing credit, then they're likely to be a DEA registrant, which is what allows them to receive prescription controlled substances, and they can act as a DEA reverse distributor, and they would also be considered a RCRA reverse distributor because they're only issuing credit. In contrast, if the facility is destroying the pharmaceutical waste that they receive, then again, they're probably registered with DEA and a DEA reverse distributor, but in this case, they'd be considered a RCRA TSDF since EPA reverse distributors, they're not allowed to treat the waste that they accept from healthcare facilities. All right, so now let's talk about how this whole thing pertains to NMOA states. So DEA has a list of all of the companies that have registered with them as DEA reverse distributors. And like I said, a lot of them are both DEA and RCRA reverse distributors, but not all of them. So we're going to take a look at DEA's list of RDs and compare that to the list of RCRA RDs. And sorry, this is actually a 2-page document. We broke it up into 2 slides to make sure that it's readable for you. So this is a list of all of the DEA reverse distributors as of January of last year, and I believe this is actually the most current version. I wouldn't stake my life savings on it, but I'm pretty sure that this is the most recent version. So you can see here that in Connecticut and Massachusetts, there are DEA reverse distributors. Also in New Jersey, and it looks like New York actually has 4 DEA reverse distributors. And just as a note, this list is actually public, but it's not posted anywhere online for you to access. So in order to get it, you actually have to email DEA directly to request it. I mean, you're going to have it now if you receive these slides, and I think we can email it to you if you want. But if you want the official latest version from DEA, you actually have to contact them directly. And so this is a list of companies that have notified under Subpart P as reverse distributors. And this is actually a screenshot that we took after running the report in Metabase. And so far we have only 8 reverse distributors nationwide that have notified under Subpart P. And the ones that have asterisks next to them, those are the ones that are also on the DEA list. So as of now, in NOMOA states, there aren't actually any DEA RDs that are also RCRA RDs. But the DEA list that's a good place to start when you're trying to figure out if you have any reverse distributors in your state. And I'm just going to do 2 quick slides on profiles of the facilities in NOMOA states that have notified as RCRA Subpart P reverse distributors. And again, New Jersey is the only NOMOA state that has adopted the rule so far. So we didn't have too many to choose from. We only had 2. So this is Capital Health Medical Center in Pennington, New Jersey. And they notified as a RCRA reverse distributor in February as part of their biennial report. I believe they used to be an LQG. The thing here is that it looks pretty obvious that this is actually a healthcare facility, and so not a reverse distributor. So that's probably something that's going to need to get corrected in the near future. I'm pretty sure that in the system, at least, you can't check both the RD and healthcare facility boxes. So this facility must have just checked the wrong box. But I'm going to go back and double check that that's not possible to check both boxes. And if it is possible to check both boxes, I think that's something that we'll probably have to change in the business rules in RCRA info. So this facility actually probably isn't a reverse distributor in reality. So the only other RD that's in a NOMOA state is Novartis in Hanover, New Jersey. And, sorry, my cat is all over the place right now. He's making a lot of noise, so my apologies. So this this facility, they also notified as a Subpart P reverse distributor as part of their biennial report. And the interesting thing here is that Novartis they're really a pharmaceutical manufacturer. And it might sound, kind of intuitive to have a manufacturer operate as a reverse distributor, but we specifically called out manufacturers as a type of facility that can function as a Subpart P reverse distributor. We put that in the regs, as long as they comply with the RD standards. And so one thing to note about manufacturers is that the manufacturer, if they're acting as a reverse distributor, then they are the last stop in that flow, that reverse flow in the reverse distribution process. So any potentially creditable hazardous waste pharmaceuticals that they receive, those then have to go directly to a TSDF for disposal. They can't go on to another reverse distributor. And so we added manufacturers as a type of facility that can be a reverse distributor because we wanted, or some manufacturers, that they like to receive the pharmaceuticals that initially had gone to a reverse distributor, because they want to check the reverse distributor's work, for lack of a better term. And so that's, I think that's a good example of what we mean when we say that we created a tailored set of regulations that account for the pre-existing business practices. One thing to note about this particular site is that they're actually not registered with DEA. So that means that they can't receive controlled substances under the DEA regs. And I'm not 100% sure if manufacturers are usually DEA registrants but RCRA RDs are almost always registered with DEA. All right, so I am going to now pass it on to Kristen to talk about reverse logistics.
Okay, thanks, Brian. All right, so just to hammer this home a little bit more, right? Everything Brian has been talking about up to now is about reverse distribution. Now I'm going to switch gears and talk about reverse logistics. So reverse distribution is for prescription pharmaceuticals, and reverse logistics is basically for everything else. So that's going to include non-prescription pharmaceuticals, over-the-counters, supplements, dietary supplements, but really anything else that you can think of in retail probably goes through reverse logistics. And by the way, as Brian mentioned, we did not make these terms up. We adopted them at the request of commenters on the proposed rule to refer to these different types of reverse flows of items. I just wanted to mention a couple of things in terminology. One is, retailers are under subpart P a type of healthcare facility. So a lot of our diagrams, start with healthcare facilities kind of in the middle of the diagram and everything flows from them. Retailers are a type of healthcare facility under subpart P. Okay. So just keep that in mind. The other thing is that reverse distributors versus reverse logistics centers. Reverse distribution is a very specialized and increasingly consolidated business. There's really only 2 or 3 dozen of them in the United States, the type that we're talking about. If you go back to that list that Brian had of the DEA reverse distributors, like the one in Connecticut was Clean Harbors, right? We wouldn't call them a reverse distributor, we'd call them a TSDF. So anyway, it's a very consolidated and specialized business, and even large retailers like Walmart, they rely on third parties to do their reverse distribution of their prescription pharmaceuticals. Reverse logistics, on the other hand, is not so consolidated, although is getting somewhat consolidated. But Walmart, again, to use them as an example, they do their own reverse logistics. Okay, but they hand over their prescriptions, pharmaceuticals, to a third-party reverse distributor because it's so specialized. All right. All right. So unlike reverse distribution, with reverse logistics, redistribution actually does occur. And that redistribution can occur in the form of secondary markets. Think like dollar stores or Marshalls, or there's another one that's like Marshalls. Anyway, you go in there and those things had a first life in another store and then got sold to that secondary market. But it can also be redistributed in the form of donations. One of the examples that we've heard a lot about is like Home Depot and Lowe's. They'll donate paints to Habitat for Humanity houses. So based on that knowledge that redistribution actually is occurring in reverse logistics, in the final rule, we reaffirmed our long-standing policy by saying that if those items have some reasonable expectation of being lawfully used, reused, or reclaimed, then they are not solid waste at the healthcare facility or the retail store. So for non-prescription pharmaceuticals, this is actually codified as part of the pharmaceuticals rule in subpart P. But for everything else, for the non-pharmaceutical part of this is just in the preamble. It's not codified, right? This was the pharmaceuticals rule, not the everything else rule, right? So for the pharmaceuticals, it's codified, but for everything else, it's basically in the preamble. And we refer to that in the preamble as the reverse logistics policy. Excuse me. we knew that if we were going to be dealing with reverse logistics for pharmaceuticals, we were going to have to address the issue more broadly for, everything else. Plus, we had committed to that as part of the retail strategy, but there wasn't really a place to codify it within the pharmaceuticals rule. By the way, we did reproduce the reverse logistics policy in memo form and put it on RCRA Online. So it's an easier way to find it rather than having to dig through the preamble of the pharmaceuticals rule to find it. So again, to kind of draw the distinction between reverse distribution and reverse logistics, note that the focus shifts, right? For reverse distribution, the focus is on whether there's a reasonable expectation of receiving manufacturer's credit. But for reverse logistics, the focus shifts to whether there's a reasonable expectation of use, reuse, or reclamation. I'll look to complicate matters. I will say reverse logistics centers can and do give manufacturer credit sometimes for some items, okay? But it's just not the focus of kind of our legal rationale for the reverse logistics policy. So again, this is just a visual representation of what we've been talking about. And if you start kind of at the middle of the healthcare facility, think retailer instead of typical healthcare facility. Retailer is a type of healthcare facility in the pharmaceuticals rule. And if you go down the left-hand side of this, a reasonable expectation of use, reuse, it can go to reverse logistics center where they can do a number of things with it. They might donate it, they might sell it to the secondary market. That's usually referred to as liquidation to the secondary market. They might recycle something or repair it and then even put it back on the market. But if they can't do any of those things with it, then they become the generator, and that it becomes a waste at that point. And if it's a hazardous waste, obviously it has to go to TSCF. So the reverse logistics center becomes the generator at the point that they realize that it can't be used or reused. And therefore they're regulated under Part 262 as a typical generator. But if you shift over to the right-hand side of the column, if there is no reasonable expectation of use, reuse, or reclamation, then it is a solid waste at the retail store and it has to go directly to a TSDF. So the retail store in that case would be the generator of the hazardous waste. And if it's a pharmaceutical, they'd be regulated under Subpart P. And if it's not a pharmaceutical, those would be regulated under Part 262 or maybe 273 as a universal waste. So where did the reasonable expectation standard come from? We've gotten a lot of questions about that, what it means and where did it come from. So it's the same standard. It's that it has been since 1991 when we articulated our policy about the reverse flow of items. So that's what this slide is supposed to show. On the left-hand side is a May 1991 memo where we used that standard, saying commercial chemical products with a reasonable expectation of being recycled are not considered waste. And we adopted that same standard inside the pharmaceuticals rule and in the reverse logistics policy. And on the right-hand side of the slide is an excerpt from the 2019 preamble. So normally I would say that in order to say that a commercial chemical product is not a solid waste, normally the bar would be a little higher than just a reasonable expectation of use, reuse, or reclamation. But I think the standard kind of acknowledges that retailers don't always know whether the item can be used or reused when they send it to a reverse logistics center. But we wanted to grant a little more latitude with the goal of maximizing waste reduction through redistribution. So unfortunately, in reverse logistics, when it comes to this reasonable expectation standard, there are a few bright lines, but I would say that there are some indicators or maybe red flags of when an item probably does not have a reasonable expectation of use or reuse. For example, and we talk about these in the preamble, but for example, when an item is broken, leaking, or damaged, then it's probably not going to have a reasonable expectation of use or reuse, or even probably reclamation, right? By the way, damaged outer packaging is okay, but if the inner container is broken or damaged or leaking, then that's not good. Another indicator is when an item has what's referred to in the industry as a kill code or a destroy disposition. So that's when a manufacturer does not allow the item on the secondary market because of brand protection. You know, think of fancy perfume brands, for example. They don't want those showing up in the dollar store. So, or fancy clothing labels, right? They don't want those things showing up at Marshalls or dollar stores. They want them destroyed. They're not allowed to be redistributed. Or if an item is well past its expiration or best buy date. These are all kind of indicators that they probably don't have a reasonable expectation of use or reuse. In the preamble, as part of the reverse logistics policy, we also expressed some concern about the potential for use or overuse or abuse of the reverse logistics centers. And we said, and I'm quoting from the preamble here, we caution reverse logistics centers not to become de facto waste management facilities for their customers. Okay, so we want to encourage and maximizing waste reduction through redistribution, but we're also on the, on the flip side, we are worried that people are going to kind of overuse it and just send everything to reverse logistics, and reverse logistics facilities are going to become de facto waste management facilities, and we're concerned about that. All right, so we're going to conclude this section by showing kind of one more time the difference between reverse distribution and reverse logistics, and then we'll move on to some implementation questions. So first, let's do reverse distribution on the left-hand side. Again, reverse distributions for prescription pharmaceuticals. We're going to get to that parenthetical in a minute. And despite the name, reverse distributors are not in the business of redistribution. Okay. And this has nothing to do with the EPA regulations, by the way. It's primarily due to the fact that redistribution is impeded by State Board of Pharmacy regulations, as well as DEA chain of custody regulations, as well as FDA pedigree regulations. Okay, so once it goes to reverse distributor, basically it's dead product, otherwise known as in the RCRA world as waste, right? It's not going to go back on the market. It's going to go to get destroyed. So that means that the pharmaceuticals, prescription pharmaceuticals that are sent to reverse distributor are considered solid waste at the healthcare facility, or in this case, a retail store. So this is a new, more stringent interpretation that is now codified in Subpart P. So it became effective on August 21st, 2019 in non-authorized states, Indian country, and territories. But in authorized states, it's not effective until the state adopts Subpart P. Unless, of course, the state was already more stringent than us on this matter, and many were. So the other half of the slide is the reverse logistics. And again, that's basically for everything else, right, other than prescription pharmaceuticals. So that includes non-prescription pharmaceuticals, OTCs, dietary supplements, as well as all other unsold retail items. The reverse logistics centers actually do redistribute items sometimes via donations and liquidation. And that allows us to say that the items that have a reasonable expectation of use or reuse are not considered solid waste at the retail store. So as far as we were concerned federally, this is just a restatement of existing policy. So it became effective immediately in non-authorized states, Indian country, and territories. But in authorized states, basically we say check with your state because it depends on the state interpretation. So also remember that the reverse logistics policy kind of has two components, right? There is a codification of the existing policy when it comes to non-prescription pharmaceuticals going through reverse logistics. So eventually that means that this will become somewhat uniform when, the states have all adopted Subpart P. But when it comes to other unsold retail items, non-pharmaceuticals, nothing's codified, right? This is in the preamble under the reverse logistics policy. So we'd like to kind of talk about, what states plan to do about that, explore that, what the state's positions and interpretations are in reverse logistics for non-pharmaceuticals from retail. Hopefully we can have time for that at the end of the presentation. So we're going to go over a few FAQs, kind of implementation things that have come up about the rule since it went out. So no matter kind of how many comments we receive and how many possibilities we think we've considered and gamed out, it's inevitable after a final rule comes out, new questions come up that we didn't contemplate and or didn't answer. So to address these implementation issues, we put out memos, we put out FAQs, sometimes both. And so far we've done 3 FAQs specifically about reverse distribution on our website so far. We'll go over these. That's not good. Okay. So the first question is, can a non-prescription pharmaceutical be sent to a reverse distributor? So Brian and I have just explained ad nauseum. RD, reverse distribution, is for prescription pharmaceuticals. Reverse logistics is for everything else. So naturally, you'd probably say no. A non-prescription pharmaceutical should not go to a reverse distributor, it should go to a reverse logistics center. But unfortunately, this is RCRA and things are never quite as clean cut as we'd like. And since the rule went final, we've become aware of a couple of situations when non-prescription pharmaceuticals have traditionally been sent to reverse distributors. So now what? Now what do we do? So sorry, skipped a page on my stuff. The 2 scenarios that we've become aware of are that retail facilities, they're required, well, any pharmacy honestly, is required to keep some non-prescription pharmaceuticals behind the counter. Think about when you want to buy Sudafed now, or at least the one that still has pseudoephedrine in it, right? That has to be kept by DEA regulation behind the counter now. It's not a prescription, but it has to be kept behind the counter with all the other prescriptions. So what happens is, all the stuff out of the pharmacy get sent to a reverse distributor altogether, even though those aren't prescription pharmaceuticals. The other scenario that we've been told about is that some healthcare facilities, particularly the smaller hospitals or clinics, they have so few things that would go through reverse logistics that they don't have contracts with reverse logistics centers. They only have contracts with reverse distributors. So we've concluded that healthcare facilities can actually send non-prescription pharmaceuticals to reverse distributors. And the reasoning is that we would consider that to be over-management of the non-prescription pharmaceutical. So if the OTC went to a reverse logistics center for possible use reuse, then it wouldn't even be considered a solid waste, let alone a hazardous waste, right? But if the OTC goes to a reverse distributor for credit, then it is a solid and a hazardous waste. All right, so that is, in order for the OTC to go to a reverse distributor, it has to be managed under Subpart P as a potentially creditable hazardous waste pharmaceutical. And that means it has to meet all the criteria that other potentially creditable hazardous waste pharmaceuticals would have to meet, which is that they have to have a reasonable expectation of receiving manufacturer's credit. So you can't just send any old over-the-counter to a reverse distributor. It has to have some reasonable expectation of receiving manufacturer's credit. It's got to be in the original manufacturer packaging. It has to be undispensed, although that's really not entirely relevant for OTCs. And it has to be unexpired or less than 1 year past expiration. Okay. And in that scenario, we would consider it over-management compared to going through a reverse logistics center. And therefore, we're saying it's allowable. Okay, so second question that we've gotten is, can a healthcare facility that's in a state where Subpart P is in effect send a potentially creditable hazardous waste pharmaceutical to a reverse distributor that's in a state where Subpart P is not in effect? So let's make this a more real, specific example. New Jersey has adopted Subpart P. So let's say, but the reverse distributor, the biggest reverse distributor in the country is actually in Texas, and Texas has not adopted Subpart P. So can a retailer that's a healthcare facility in New Jersey send its potentially creditable hazardous waste pharmaceuticals to the reverse distributor in Texas? And we've concluded, yes, the retailer in New Jersey can send its potentially creditable hazardous waste pharmaceuticals to Texas, even though Texas is not yet adopted. Now, there's a lot of kind of fine print associated with that, that even though the reverse distributor in Texas is not subject to Subpart P yet, it may have to comply kind of with some portions of Subpart P in order to keep the healthcare facility that's in New Jersey compliant. So for example, Subpart P regs for healthcare facilities require the healthcare facility to comply with the shipping standards and for potentially credible hazardous waste pharmaceuticals, as well as record keeping for those shipments, which includes delivery confirmation of each shipment that arrives at the reverse distributor. And the Subpart P regs for the reverse distributors require the reverse distributor to provide that delivery confirmation to the healthcare facility for each shipment. Now, in reality, kind of in a practical matter, the carrier is probably the one that will provide that delivery confirmation to the healthcare facility on behalf of the reverse distributor. And that's because we say that when healthcare facilities use common carriers like UPS or FedEx, or, I guess the United States Postal Service is still around for the time being. When they use those common carriers, the delivery confirmation provided by those carriers fulfills the reverse distributor's requirement to acknowledge receipt of the pharmaceuticals. The reverse distributor will have to sign that they accepted the package, and then that will trigger the delivery confirmation back to the healthcare facility. So the reverse distributor kind of has to play along with Subpart P in order to make it so the healthcare facility that is actually subject to Subpart P can be compliant. So the third question is one that we haven't gotten as much, but it has been a source of confusion, so we thought we'd take the opportunity to clarify this. And the question is a reverse distributor required to issue manufacturer credit to a healthcare facility within 30 days of receiving a shipment of potentially creditable hazardous waste pharmaceuticals? And the answer is no, and I'll explain. It seems like a very inefficient system, all this shipping of things around the country. Especially when pharmaceuticals go to multiple reverse distributors and possibly even a manufacturer before they get sent to an incinerator. The reason behind all this shipping around is that each manufacturer has a contract with a specific reverse distributor to issue credit on its behalf. But a healthcare facility can have pharmaceuticals from many different manufacturers. So when a healthcare facility sends its potentially credible hazardous waste pharmaceuticals to their reverse distributor, the first thing that reverse distributor has to do is sort through them and figure out which ones they're allowed to issue manufacturer credit for and which ones they've got to send on to another RD to get manufacturer credit. So what the regulations require is that initial sorting or evaluation process has to happen within 30 days of the pharmaceuticals arriving at the reverse distributors. And some people have think that means that the reverse distributor actually has to issue the manufacturer credit within 30 days, but that's not actually the case. The regs don't specify a time frame for issuing the manufacturer credit, only for evaluating the pharmaceuticals and where they need to go next. Okay, so I'm going to give it back to Brian, and he's going to finish up.
Great, thanks, Kristen. All right, so now I'm going to talk about the reports that reverse distributors that they're required to send to their implementing state or region when they receive any unauthorized waste. And we're trying to keep it short today, so I'm not going to get into the specifics about what we mean when we say unauthorized waste, but in general, we're talking about things like non-creditable hazardous waste pharmaceuticals, medical waste, basically anything that is not a potentially creditable hazardous waste pharmaceutical, with the one exception that Kristen just mentioned. So, we limited the types of waste that a reverse distributor can receive because they're in the business of issuing manufacturer credit to healthcare facilities on behalf of manufacturers for unused pharmaceuticals. So really, they should only be receiving potentially creditable hazardous waste pharmaceuticals. We were concerned that healthcare facilities would try and finagle the system and use the reverse distributors kind of as a one-stop shop for all of their waste, or that maybe RDs might even encourage for healthcare facilities to do that for a fee. So we required these unauthorized waste reports in order to help deter that from happening. So when a reverse distributor receives unauthorized waste, they are required to notify both the healthcare facility that sent the waste and the RD's implementing state or region in some cases. And the requirement for these reports, it's actually based on similar requirements for TSDFs that receive unmanifested waste. So, we didn't just kind of dream this up out of the blue. There's actually a precedent within RCRA for reporting unauthorized waste. All right, so here's the thing about these unauthorized waste reports. So like I just mentioned, the regs, they require reverse distributors to send the reports to the healthcare facility and to the implementing agency. But there actually isn't any requirement for anyone to send the reports to the state where the healthcare facility is located. So without some sort of information sharing mechanism, it'll be pretty difficult for the states with healthcare facilities that are sending unauthorized waste to identify the bad actors that are in their states. So to help remedy that problem, we are currently in the process of developing a SharePoint site that will act as a repository for these unauthorized waste reports, so that states will be able to go into the SharePoint site whenever they want, and they can either view the reports or download them or do whatever they need to do to help them identify which facilities are consistently shipping waste to RD that they should be shipping. So kind of here's the information flow for these reports that we've come up with in conjunction with the Pharmaceuticals Rural Users Group, and thanks to everybody for helping as part of that group for helping to kind of hash this out. So first, like I've mentioned already, the reverse distributor is required to send the unauthorized waste reports to the implementing state or to the implementing region in unauthorized states, territories, and tribal land. Then the authorized state will send the report to their regional office. The region that receives the report will then upload those reports to the SharePoint site that we've created and file them in the folder for the state where the healthcare facility is located. So that way, when somebody goes in, they look for, if they're looking for a healthcare facility in their state, they'll just go to their state in that on the SharePoint site. So that's it for the upward flow of these reports. So after that, any region or state that wants access to the SharePoint site will be given access. They just have to request access from me. And then they can download the reports, view them at their convenience. So if any of you would like to be given access to the SharePoint site, which is still kind of in development, we're still working out the kinks, but it is up and running. So if you'd like access to the site, just feel free to send me an email. It's Brian. I'm Brian Kenizer. My email is kenizer.brian@epa.gov, and that's KNIESER.BRIAN. Brian spelled the right way. I think my contacts info is at the end of the slide deck, anyways. And so the thing is, without this SharePoint site, these reports they would have to be emailed around, I guess, in order to share this info, and that can get kind of messy. So this is our kind of collective best way that we figured out is the best way to get the information to the people that want the information and those that can act upon it. So, you know, whether it'll work out like we planned, that's another story, but we're making the effort. So that's it for unauthorized waste reports. These last two slides, so we're almost there. The last two slides are just talking about state adoption. So this slide is actually, it's a map of the states where Subpart P is currently in effect. And just to clarify, we're tracking Subpart P adoption separately from nicotine, the nicotine amendment adoption. And that's because they're basically separable parts of the rule, so states can adopt them independent of each other. So for the states that are in purple, those are places where the federal regulations are implemented by the region. And so that means that the rule has been in effect in those states and territories since the federal effective date in August of last year. The states in blue, those are authorized states that have adopted the rule. And just to let you know, the most recent adopter was actually Alabama. And we also expect a number of other states to come online this year. And it sounds like Utah and I think Vermont and Connecticut are some of those states that should be adopting pretty soon, or at least I think within the year. So as of today, there are 11 states total where Subpart P is in effect, and New Jersey is the only SWAMO state where Subpart P is in effect. For the nicotine amendment, it's a little different. So this is the map of states that have adopted the nicotine amendment. And as you can probably tell, there are more states that have adopted the nicotine amendment than Subpart P. And that's partly due to the fact that the changes were automatic in some of the states that incorporate the regulations by reference, because they already had a reference to Part 261. So when we changed Part 261, their regs already pointed to that change. And then there are also, and that's kind of in contrast to the Subpart P, which actually has to be added. There are also some states that were pretty motivated to get this nicotine amendment in place as soon as possible. I should also mention that New York has actually put out a memo that allows generators to use the nicotine amendment before it's adopted by New York. But since it's not officially adopted, you know, we had to kind of mull over whether or not to put it on our map, and our division director, former division director, made a call to leave it off the map until then. So that's why it's not showing up on the map, just full disclosure in case you're wondering. So as far as the SWAMO states go, generators in Vermont, New York, and New Jersey, they can all use the nicotine amendment as of right now. So that's it for what we have in our slides today. I think we will move now into question and answer session. Is that right?
Hey, Brian.
Thanks, Brian.
That state's New Hampshire, not Vermont.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
It's the upside down New Vermont. Sorry.
Well,
I
yeah,
wrote that in my notes.
Do not want to be confused with being in Vermont. Let's just say that for the moment.
Sorry about that.
Before we move on to questions and answers, and we do have a lot, I wanted to give an opportunity for our colleagues in New Jersey to say a few words about, well, some of the things you all talked about, and the fact that they, I think, have at least done one inspection at one of those reverse distributors, assuming that they are a reverse distributor. So I'm going to unmute Jeff Salabridis and see if he wants to say a few words about their experience now. As he said, they've adopted by reference the rules. And Jeff, if there's someone else you want me to unmute, I can do that. Jeff, you're unmuted.
I think I'm unmuted too. Can you hear me? It's Amy Scafidi.
I can hear you, Amy. Okay, are you going to talk about this?
So we haven't performed any inspections at any reverse distributors. We had thought initially that Cardinal Health was a reverse distributor, but in reality, they're like a huge CVS. The only reverse distributor that we do have in New Jersey is in Jersey City. I forget what name they go by. They have a DBA, but we have not gotten out to see them yet. But they were a very small reverse distributor and hardly generated any hazardous-based pharmaceuticals.
Thanks, Amy.
You're welcome.
Jeff, did you want to add anything?
No, I thought I heard earlier that there was also one in Pennington. I don't know if that one was inspected. Is that in your region, Martin?
Let me get Martin unmuted. Hold on. Go ahead, Martin. Martin,
no, we haven't. Can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead, Martin.
No, we have not inspected that one, so it's good that we had this presentation.
So this is Brian. So the one in Pennington, that's the one that we think is probably actually a healthcare facility and just might have notified incorrectly.
That's what I think.
Yeah.
Okay, very good.
There was another. There's Novartis is in Hanover, and they're a manufacturer, but they have notified probably correctly as a reverse distributor.
Okay, I'll transition to some of the questions now.
Sorry, Terry, can I add something to what Susie just said? So that Cardinal Health facility, we actually went to them a number of years ago in doing research for the pharmaceuticals rule. They're what's referred to as a wholesale distributor, so a forward distributor of pharmaceuticals as opposed to a reverse distributor. They're huge, right? They're huge. There's wholesale distribution of pharmaceuticals is highly concentrated. There are three big forward distributors: Cardinal Health, McKesson, and AmerisourceBergen. I think they own, 90 to 95% of the forward distribution of pharmaceuticals in the country. They actually purchase pharmaceuticals from manufacturers, store them in their warehouses, and then ship them out daily to healthcare facilities of all types and retailers and hospitals and not long-term care facilities, but they have their own specialized distributors. But they refer to themselves as like a pharmacy on steroids, right? It's a warehouse full of boxes of pharmaceuticals that get boxed up and shipped out daily to the healthcare facilities. They do get returns, but not in the same sense that reverse distributors do. So naturally, in an operation that big, sometimes they're going to make mistakes, right? So they'll send something out to a CVS, and CVS will say, no, this isn't what I ordered, or I didn't order this many, and they send them back. But they've got really good data, and we cite that in the preamble to the final rule. I think it was 93% of their returns are actually put back on the shelf as product and then can go out to a different customer. So it's their kind of quote returns are very different than what gets sent to a reverse distributor, because all that stuff is never going to see the light of day again at a reverse distributor. Whereas at Cardinal Health and other wholesale distributors, their stuff continues to be product because almost all of it gets redistributed as product.
Okay, thanks, Kristen. I think that was helpful. I'm going to start with the questions now. The first one that I got is from Sharif Rahman, and I'm going to unmute Sharif. The question that was posted is, so is it a hazardous waste at a healthcare facility, or should it be managed as hazardous waste at a healthcare facility? And Sharif, do you want to say anything more about your question? You're unmuted now. Sharif? Okay. Brian or Kristen, do you want to try to answer this?
I kind of missed the beginning of the question. What type of waste are we talking about?
Well, that's not entirely clear. That's why I hope Sharif could clarify his question. So it says, so is it a hazardous waste at the healthcare facility, or should it be managed as hazardous waste at a healthcare facility? And I assume it's the pharmaceuticals he's talking about.
Well, the potentially creditable. So there's two different types of hazardous waste pharmaceuticals. There's, or at least that are generated at a healthcare facility. There's potentially creditable and non-creditable. So we've been talking about potentially creditable this whole time because only potentially creditables can go to a reverse distributor. So yes, potentially creditables are waste at the healthcare facility, and they need to be managed as potentially creditables at the healthcare facility. but we have a whole kind of carve out for in the regulations for how to manage potentially creditables at a healthcare facility. And basically we took a really hands-off approach to those in particular, the potentially creditable ones, because they still have value. So there's plenty of incentive for a healthcare facility to get them off site, you know, relatively quickly, and to make sure that they stay intact, so that they will get that manufacturer credit if they, you know, if they, at least so they maintain the potential to get the manufacturer credit. So they do have to be managed as hazardous waste at a healthcare facility, but there are very few regulations that apply to potentially creditables at a healthcare facility.
Okay, the next question is from Norman Rose with EPA Region 2, and I'm going to unmute Norman because he's got a couple of things here, so maybe he can wrap them up together. But the first one is, when is it a good time to talk about Novartis and Capital Health? Norm, you're unmuted.
Hi, yeah, I work with Becky Mullen on buying reports, so I guess I'd just like to double check with Brian or whoever, or Kristen, you know, what the Cardinal buying report should reflect as opposed to what's there now. What's the other site? I forgot.
The Capital Health.
Yeah, Capital Health is the first one. The second one is Novartis.
Yeah.
What was the issue with Novartis?
There isn't any issue with that facility. They are a pharmaceutical manufacturer that has notified as a reverse distributor under Subpart P, which is totally allowed under the regs. So
Okay. So there's,
they would show up as a reverse distributor.
Yeah.
okay,
So
their submittal was okay.
well, let me add to that. It's questionable. It might be worth looking into. So Novartis is a manufacturer, but if you look up that particular location of Novartis, I don't think that because, you know, through Google Earth, right, and Street View and everything, you can get a pretty good sense. I don't think there's any manufacturing going on at that facility.
Are we talking about the location in South Brunswick?
I don't have that slide handy, Brian. What's the
Yeah, that's Hanover.
Oh, it's in Hanover. Okay. I thought Hanover was a manufacturing site. Okay. I'll have.
It might be. It doesn't look like it, but if they've notified on the BR as a reverse distributor, and it might be worth looking into.
Okay.
The fact that they're not, if they are, so Novartis manufactures controlled substances, and if they're reverse distributing controlled substances at that location, they should be a DEA reverse distributor registered with the DEA, and they're not. So something's not adding up. Like, I don't think that facility is manufacturing, you know, based on what I saw on Google Earth. And they've notified as a BR, as a RD on RBR, but they're not a DEA reverse distributor. So if they're an RD, there's probably a problem with DEA. If they're a manufacturer, they shouldn't be notifying as an RD. So something's not adding up. So you should probably look into it.
Okay. Yeah, we're still got about 34 buying reports that are not processed for New Jersey for odd reasons. They've been all notified like 3 times. So I'll look into it. Thank you.
Okay.
So Norm, you had another question, which was, what about sending overseas for resale returned pharmaceuticals?
Right, because under the what is it, 273, we went to visit Scott's fertilizer, and they had stuff that wasn't authorized for sale in the United States, but they were shipping it overseas. So it wasn't considered a waste. And I was wondering if that's the same thing with pharmaceuticals, where if you're going to ship it overseas, then there wouldn't be a waste determination.
The FDA has regulations about what can be shipped overseas. At least as far as donations. I think the WHO does as well, the WHO, World Health Organization. You know, there's a lot of concern about the optics of, well, that medication's expired and not good enough for you United States folks, but yet you can ship it over to, you know, the third world and expect us to have it. So there's a lot of really concerning optics about that, as there should be, and the FDA and the WHO have both put in regulations about that when it comes to pharmaceuticals, right? Because pharmaceuticals are ingested, right? So that's a very different standard than probably for fertilizer.
Okay. Just curious. Thank you.
Yeah,
So I'm going to move on.
I was
We've
just going to
got
say
a
there's
bunch of
more
other
information in the
questions.
preamble about that, about the donations going overseas.
Okay. I'm going to unmute Robert Nero, who had a couple of questions. Robert in Rhode Island. Robert, I've unmuted. Go ahead, Robert, you're unmuted. The first question is, reverse logistics, does that include goods other than medicine related? And I think the answer is yes to that. I think you did address that. But Robert, go ahead. Do you want to answer that first question? And then Robert can chime in.
Yes, so reverse logistics is for anything other than a prescription pharmaceutical.
So one of his questions is, what types of goods are included under reverse logistics? So is everything else? What is everything else?
Pretty much anything you can think of at a retail store.
Maybe we should just
Robert,
clarify that that would include over-the-counter pharmaceuticals.
Yeah.
As well as supplements and anything else at retailer.
Personal care products, or you know, anything that a pharmacy might sell. It could be a lot of different things.
It can be, yeah, most of it, like think Walmart or Target, a store right huge like that. Almost anything at that store can go through reverse logistics and end up at like a dollar store or a Marshall's, or it can be food, it can be personal care products, it can be dishes, it can be clothing, it can be, you know, just anything at that store can go through reverse logistics pretty much.
Okay. Robert, you're unmuted. Did you have anything to add? Maybe not. Okay. We have a comment from Steve Sarnos. Steve says Vermont is planning to adopt within the year! Exclamation mark. So he's excited about that. I'll unmute Steve and see if he wants to add anything. Go ahead, Steve.
Hi, can you hear me?
You want to add anything? Yeah,
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we're in the process of wrapping up the drafting process for our regulations. We're picking up a whole bunch of rules, and the farm rule is prominent as a new subchapter in our regs. And so next step is for EPA regional review, and we hope to be going out to public comment, probably late summer, early fall.
Great.
Thanks, Steve.
So
Go ahead, Steve.
no, I think that was me saying thanks to Steve for the input.
Great. Okay, so the next batch of questions are coming from Ross Bunnell. I'm going to unmute Ross, and his first question is, what is the ROL number for the EPA memo that reiterates the interpretations regarding reverse logistics that are in the preamble to the farms rule? And I'm going to unmute you, Ross. Go ahead, Brian and Kristen.
Yeah, I thought I had it on the slide, but I apparently don't.
Yeah, I realized we actually didn't really include much in the way of resources. So I'm looking it up right now.
I can get you the Rick Run line number. Sorry about that.
Okay. Ross, you have a long question here. Do you want to get into it, or do you want me to read it? You're unmuted. All right, maybe his audio is not working. documentation of claims provisions of 40 CFR 261.2F apply to either pharmaceuticals that are managed by reverse distribution facilities or to other materials that are managed by reverse logistics facilities. In other words, in states that have adopted the FARMS rule must healthcare facilities, reverse distributors, and reverse logistics be able to document that there is a reasonable expectation of credit for prescription pharmaceuticals or that other items are reasonably expected to be used, reused, or reclaimed. Ross, you're unmuted if you want to explain this.
Yeah, I think I understand that. Right, Ross, you're asking if 261.2F would apply to claims that pharmaceuticals going through reverse logistics are not solid waste. Is that correct?
He's unmuted, but I don't know why we can't hear him. So I don't know what's going on.
So yeah. 261.2F is, if you want to claim something is not a solid waste, you have to document it. But there's some fine print along with that that's always made it a little awkward, in my opinion, about, you have to document it in the case of an enforcement action or something like that. But that's a good question. I don't have a firm answer for it. My gut reaction is I don't see why not, why it wouldn't apply, but I don't think we addressed that in I know we didn't address it in the regs. I don't even think we addressed it in the preamble. We might have addressed it in the response to comments. So I don't know, and I'd have to get back to you.
Okay, thanks. It turns out Ross doesn't have a microphone, so I guess that's why his audio is not working. So his other question is, will the slides be available? Yes. We will make the slides available, and in fact, we'll make the recording of today's webinar available to the participants. So his next question is, how vape shops, manufacturers, and distribution facilities fit into this? Correction, how do vape shops, vape product manufacturers, and vape product distribution facilities fit into this? How vape shops, manufacturers, and distribution facilities, if at all.
I'm sorry, Terry, I'm missing a lot of what you're saying.
I'm sorry.
It sounds like you're outside.
Oh, well, I'm on a speakerphone. Here, I'll try. Is this better?
Yes.
Okay. So his question is, how do vape shops, vape product manufacturers, and vape product distribution facilities fit into this? How do vape shops, manufacturers, and distribution facilities fit into the RD/RL picture, if at all?
Well, I guess let's first talk about the vape shops themselves. Vape shops, well, let's talk about what they sell first. Like they sell e-cigarettes and e-liquids with nicotine in them. Nicotine's PO75, hazardous waste. They're not part of the exemption for the patches, gums, and lozenges, right? So e-liquids and e-cigarettes continue to be PO75 hazardous waste. We've called them under the pharmaceuticals rule. We've included those e-cigarettes and e-liquids that are packaged for retail sale. They're considered pharmaceuticals. So if a facility is selling pharmaceuticals, they are referred to as a healthcare facility. This is kind of an awkward realization about the pharmaceuticals rule that we end up calling vape shops healthcare facilities. But they, as a retailer of pharmaceuticals, they do end up being considered healthcare facilities. So the management of those e-cigarettes, e-liquids, and so on would be under subpart P, just like any other retailer or other, actual healthcare facility. The distribution center for those e-cigarettes and so on, those would not be regulated as healthcare facilities. just like, well, actually, no, I hadn't thought about that. Wholesale distributors are regulated as healthcare facilities. So I guess if vape shops have their own distribution chain, those wholesale distributors would be considered healthcare facilities too, just like, you know, the other pharmaceutical other pharmaceutical wholesale distributors like Cardinal Health that we were talking about earlier.
Okay, Martin, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to move on. Do you have more to say about vape shops?
Nope.
Okay. So Martin Sanchez wanted to clarify something. I'm going to unmute him. He says, he's self-muted. Novartis is in East Hanover. The Novartis in East Hanover is a reverse distributor according to a 2016 inspection that was conducted. I assume that's a record inspection. Martin is self-muted. Anyway, so I guess that's what they found. The final question I have.
I'm sorry, Terry. If they truly are a reverse distributor, which is what they look like, you know, from Google Earth, they look more like a reverse distributor than a manufacturer. If they have any controlled substances on site, they need to get registered with DEA ASAP. Because they cannot have controlled substances on site without being a registrant with DEA.
All right, we need to get on the ball with that. All right, final question, or the last question I have so far, is from Michael. I'm not going to pronounce it right. Anyway, I'm going to unmute you, Michael. Michael asks, how does the credit system work for the manufacturer and the RD, reverse distributor? Michael?
Yeah.
You want to say anything more about that?
I've never inspected a pharmacy or anything like that. I'm relatively new, so I'm not quite familiar with the credit system. What I'm seeing is like the manufacturer or the RD center would get some credit for proper disposal of, you know, prescriptions, which you don't want to just dump into the environment or something like that. So I'm just curious, like how the system works.
Right.
Like the credit for the you know, the distribution center, or is it a credit for the manufacturer, or both?
Yes. So I think the easiest kind of example that I have found to explain this credit system is in the retail system. So let's say I'm Target and it's allergy season. The manufacturer wants me to display their allergy medicine front and center and have lots of it during allergy season. And so, you know, as the manufacturer, right, they're kind of pushing the retailers to stock it prominently and stock a lot of it. But as you know, as the retailer, you know, they don't want to take all that risk for overstocking something and not selling it. So the manufacturer is basically saying, don't worry, go ahead, overstock it. If it doesn't sell, we're going to give you a refund, or at least a partial refund, for the stuff that doesn't sell. So the reverse distributors are the middlemen between the manufacturers and the retailers, right? There's thousands and thousands of retailers out there. And the manufacturers don't want to have to deal with giving credit to every single individual retailer. There's just too many of them. It's too burdensome. So up crop this middlemen of reverse distributors, where there's, you know, 2 or 3 dozen of them in the country. The retailers ship their pharmaceuticals to the reverse distributors. The reverse distributors know all the policies of the manufacturers for getting credit on various pharmaceuticals. They then issue the credit for those unused pharmaceuticals on behalf of the manufacturer to the retailer. And of course, for their trouble, the reverse distributor is going to take a cut of that credit that they're giving to the healthcare facility. Does that help?
Yes, that definitely helps. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's kind of the origins of the reverse distribution system. It's created this bizarro process, though, of pharmaceuticals just getting shipped all over the country constantly in order to get this credit. And when we visited the largest reverse distributor in Texas in researching the rule, it's enormous. You know, I keep invoking that scene at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark, where it's just this warehouse that just goes on and on and on, of, you know, shelves and shelves, you know, I don't know, 5 racks high or something of boxes of pharmaceuticals, and they're all ultimately going to get disposed, incinerated.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Kristen. Somebody has still some audio issues. So I don't have any more questions from the question box or the chat box at this point. I want to certainly thank Brian and Kristen for taking the time. Kristen took her time from having the house to herself to be with us this morning. We really appreciate it. Brian had to ship his kids out of the house to keep things quiet, even though it was, what was it, a cat who was jumping all over the place, whatever. So anyway, oh, another question just popped up from Ross, and I think this might be for New Jersey, and I think I'm going to unmute maybe Martin to answer this, Martin Sanchez. Martin, I think you're self-muted. So the question is, has New Jersey DEP had any enforcement cases under Subpart P yet? So Martin, do you want to try to take this? You're muted yourself. Or I could try to unmute Jeff. Let's see.
I don't think the
Jeff
Southern
Calabrese?
region did.
We have.
kind of,
It's Amy.
oh, we have? Okay.
Go ahead. Hi, Martin. Go ahead.
We've had a lot of, we have had no enforcement action, at least in my region. I don't think we've issued a notice of violation. And since the rule came into effect fairly quickly after the whole coronavirus and COVID-19 stay at home and work from home, I don't think we've had too many places that we've gone to, too many healthcare facilities that we've gone to. What we've seen and what I've heard from the inspectors are that a lot of healthcare facilities are still labeling all their pharmaceuticals that are heading for reverse distribution as hazardous waste. So there's still this confusion within the healthcare facilities on how to comply with the rule. And we've also seen a lot of healthcare facilities have not even notified that they're HF. So those two things is what we've seen. But we have not pursued enforcement action. Right.
The Southern region did a lot of compliance assistance. We did a lot of reach out to the hospitals and, you know, just went through the rule with them and did tours and just advised them of the labeling and what changes took place. We also saw that because a lot of the states did not adopt the rule yet, that they were forced to still label the containers as they previously did. And the manifests, they had to still use the same type of manifest and could have put that pharma code because the disposal facility was not in New Jersey and that state did not adopt the reg.
There's a follow-up.
How did your compliance assistance go with the hospitals?
I think it went rather well. A lot of them, even though, you know, we did outreach and sent them your slides and the presentation and, you know, information on the new rule, they still really were not familiar with it and didn't really understand that it was actually, you know, helping them out and giving them some relief. So it really went well, and they were They were waiting for their transporters also to get on board with the new rule because it was time for a new contract.
Mhm.
So a lot of the major healthcare facilities had to wait for the new contract to take place so that the vendor could, bring in the new labeling and things like that.
I live in Virginia, and Virginia's adopted the rule. And unfortunately, my husband was in the hospital a few months ago. Brian made fun of me because I was taking pictures. Instead of tending to my husband, I was taking pictures of like their hazardous waste containers in his room.
Kristen, it's the curse, right?
He was fine. It was okay. It wasn't anything serious.
Well, I'm glad to hear that it wasn't serious or he wasn't.
And it was definitely pre-COVID. So.
Okay, I was going to ask if it was good. All right. Last word for today, because we're about out of time, is from Robert Nero from Rhode Island. He said, Rhode Island has had many cases under subpart P. Robert, do you want to say anything more? Robert, you're unmuted. Maybe he doesn't have a microphone either. Okay. All right. Well, we're really at the hour. Again, I want to thank Kristen and Brian for joining us this morning, and thank everyone else for hanging in there for this webinar. As I said, we will be posting the slides, and we will be posting the recording on the NMOA website, and I will let you know where to find that material. I'll send out an email to everyone notifying you where the materials are located. And just to remind people, next Tuesday morning, we will be having yet another webinar, hazardous waste webinar, and this one is going to be a presentation by Daniel Teitelbaum from EPA Region 2 and some the folks from New York and New Jersey, talking about a targeting tool that EPA Region 2 has developed for identifying locations for inspections and other activities. So it's a kind of new tool the Region 2 has been using the last couple of years. So the Region 1 folks are very interested in it, and maybe others from Region 2 who aren't quite so familiar with it. So it's a great opportunity to learn about this tool and how it's helping both EPA Region 2 and the states coordinate around inspections. And so same time next week, I will be sending out shortly a schedule for additional webinars for the rest of the summer. We're going to be doing what we hope are weekly sessions. These will be in a substitute for the annual in-person training, day-long in-person training that we normally do. And our hazardous waste training work group is planning all these sessions, and I think it's going to be a good schedule coming up. So again, thanks everyone, and everyone take care and stay safe, and we'll talk soon. Thanks. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Terry.